Hello, thank you, friends, and welcome. Welcome to Temple Sinai and to this memorial and celebration of the life and the legacy of Amos Oz. I want to just take a moment, if you would, and I'll join you in doing this, if you would just make sure that your cell phones are switched to silent, vibrate, or something that won't disturb the service and the lectures. I know you're here to learn and to celebrate and be together. My name is Jonathan Roos. I'm the senior rabbi here at Temple Sinai, and I know I speak on behalf of the entire congregation when I say how honored we are to host you today, how saddened we are by the death of Amos Oz, and how committed we are with you to keeping his work alive for generations to come. That includes his literary work, his love of and commitment to Hebrew and Jewish culture, and his political and social activism, especially in the pursuit of peace. This program was envisioned by, among other people, Jeremy Ben-Ami, who is the founder of J Street, and we're grateful to him and to J Street for this gathering, along with the many partner organizations and communal leaders who are part of this today. They are all listed in those programs that you received as you entered. I once heard Amos Oz when describing A Tale of Love and Darkness. He told a story about the postman from his childhood. In the Kerem Avraham neighborhood of Jerusalem, when Amos was a child, he said there was a postman named Mr. Maluach who didn't just deliver the mail. He would write letters of his own, notes to the recipients on the outside of the envelopes that he would deliver. Maybe you've heard him tell this story. Mr. Maluach wouldn't read the mail, he wouldn't open it up, he was reliable with his delivery, but he would write unsolicited feedback on how a family was raising their child. Or he shared his opinions about the British, or how long somebody had left their laundry hanging on the lines. Oz said that that is what he was doing with A Tale of Love and Darkness, that the real content was his parents, Fania and Yehuda Aryeh, and other family members who had died. He, the author of record, was actually more Mr. Maluach, a faithful deliverer of messages, who got to add some of his own stories and his own comments. That is what we must now do for him. Amos Oz left us more than enough content to fill the envelopes and encouraged us to see the world and ourselves as needing to add some more commentary of our own, a bit of ourselves to it, and to be sure that it is delivered to the next ones and those who should read it for generations to come. Many of you probably know this, but in the spirit of a memorial, let me tell you a bit about his background to set the stage for our event today. He was born Amos Klausner in Jerusalem on May 4th, 1939. The child of Yehuda, Aryeh, and Fania, who had immigrated from Eastern Europe and met in Jerusalem. They spoke and read many languages, but taught Amos Hebrew. The Jerusalem of his childhood is richly conveyed in his writings, and as you no doubt know, his mother's suicide when he was young impacted him significantly. And only a few years later, he left Jerusalem and his father's house and moved to Kibbutz Hulda. At the kibbutz, he changed his name to Oz, from the Hebrew for courage, and at Hulda, he met Nili Zuckerman. They married in 1960. She and their 3 children, Fania, Galia, and Daniel, survive him, as do several grandchildren. Fania is with us here today and will speak with us shortly. I know I speak for everyone here and beyond this room in offering our heartfelt condolences on the loss of your beloved father. Amos Oz completed his obligatory army service in 1961 and enrolled in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, studying philosophy and literature. He returned to Hulda after graduation and settled into a routine of writing and farming kibbutz duties. He fought then in the 1967 and 1973 wars, and he spoke out against the occupation nearly from its inception, and was one of the founders of Peace Now and a supporter of the peace movement throughout his life. The Oz family moved later to Arad, where they lived for decades, and he became a professor in the Department of Hebrew Literature at Ben Gurion University. He wrote prolifically in several genres, and his books, as you know, have been translated into dozens of languages. He won some of the world's highest literary honors and prizes across the world. In awarding him the prestigious Israel Prize in 1998, the judges wrote that in his writing he has accompanied the realities of Israeli life and expressed them uniquely as he touches upon the pain and the ebullience of the Israeli soul. He died on Friday, December 28th, 2018, at 79 years old. That was the 20th of Tevet, 5779, Yom Shishi, the Shabbat of Parshat Shemot, which is a fitting coincidence in many ways. Not because he was such a traditionally religious person, the opposite, we know. In an interview, though, many years ago, Amos Oz described what he found compelling in other people's writing. He said, when a work of literature suddenly makes the very familiar unfamiliar to me, or just the opposite, when a work of literature makes the unfamiliar almost intimately familiar, I am moved to tears or smiles or anger or gratitude. And we see that in the turn of events of Shemot, in which a Pharaoh arises who knows not of Joseph, and suddenly the intimately familiar is made unfamiliar. But perhaps even more powerfully connected to his life and legacy is the story of generational transmission at the heart of Shemot. The book opens with a group of relatives, Jacob's family, listed as individuals, but soon conveys the emergence of an entire nation, a people, who are told before they are even out of their own slave quarters, when your children ask you some future day about what happened here and what this means to you, you must tell them, you must transmit the story. In their book, Jews and Words, Fania and Amos wrote of just such a dynamic as an essential component of Jewish history and culture. They wrote that the national and cultural genealogy of the Jews has always depended on the intergenerational transmittal of verbal content. While scholarship matters enormously, they wrote, family matters even more. In this space, on this day, we offer a public celebration of the life and legacy and the work of Amos Oz. We are especially grateful for and will emphasize his commitment to peace, to speaking the truth, and for a better world and a better life for all people. In such a ceremony, it wouldn't be surprising that we linger over his scholarship, over his brilliance. He was a literary genius, one of the greatest Hebrew language scholars of all time, an inspiration and a touchstone for Jewish identity for many, many people around the world. That would be right. But in doing that, we lose a bit of what he himself told us is so important. Family matters even more than the scholarship. And so we also remember him today as a son and a grandson, a father and a grandfather, a husband and a friend. I hope everyone has a copy of the program for today, of the listing of the speakers, or is at least sitting near somebody who has a copy. All of today's speakers are listed there, and they will come to the bima and offer their reflections without further introduction. So let me simply say thank you to Rabbis Esther Letterman and Stephanie Crawley, to Jeremy Ben-Ami, and to Roger Cohen, Natalie Portman, who sent a video message, and to Fania Oz-Salzberger. And there are many, many people who helped to make this event possible. In addition to those speakers, I'd like to just highlight Mindy Garfinkel, who's the chair of Temple Sinai's Israel Committee, and all of its members who have supported this program, to our administrative and building staff, and most of all, thank you to Courtney Roback from J Street, who really ran point, middle, and rear for basically everything for this event. Thank you. This is a celebration of the life and legacy of Amos Oz, and it's also a memorial service, and we're in a Beit Knesset, and although Amos Oz would probably have passed, Fania actually told me she's certain he would have passed on the traditional prayers, we will offer some of those traditional memorials at our close. He loved, or at least he signed on to the concept of irreverence that is inherently contained within Jewish forms of reverence. We don't know about God, he and Fania wrote, But Jewish continuity was always paved with words. So let us offer those words now, that the lessons and values of Amos Oz may continue indeed as a part of that crucial continuity of Judaism itself.
Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Esther Letterman. A number of years ago, a faith leader from another tradition asked the question, do you want to be the chaplain to the empire or the prophet to the revolution? To me, Amos Oz was that prophet of the revolution. So I want to read to you some words he wrote a little while ago that I feel encapsulates that sense of prophetic words and prophetic thinking. I love Israel even at times when I don't like it, even when I can't stand it. I love it because I feel somewhat at home in Israel, even though it is a flawed home. It needs some mending. If Israel at times is disappointing, that is the nature of dreams, to be somewhat disappointing once they are fulfilled. Israel is a dream come true, and the only way to keep a dream rosy and intact is to never live it out. This is true of planting a garden, raising a family, living out a sexual fantasy, or building a nation. Some people expected Israel to be a moral light unto the nations. Others expected it to be a nonstop macho show Entebbe every week. Others wanted it to be an incarnation of the Jewish shtetl from Eastern Europe. They visit us and say, no bagels, no lox, no Jewish state. Dreams can only remain wonderful as long as they don't come true. But the real Israel is not one dream come true, but a conglomeration of dreams, fantasies, blueprints, and master plans. There were people who came here to humbly wait for the Messiah. There were others, more ambitious, who intended to make the Messiah come immediately. Others wanted to be the Messiah, or to reconstruct the ancient kingdoms of David and Solomon with all their glory, or to build a Marxist paradise. So one day Stalin could visit and get the grand tour of a kibbutz, and the kibbutzniks could have a lengthy discussion with him and teach him once and for all what Marxism-Leninism is all about, and then they fantasized he would rise to his feet, say, you Jews did socialism better here than we did in Russia, and die of happiness. There were Europeans who hoped to rebuild Vienna or Prague in the heart of the Middle East with good manners and tea and European decorum, music, peace, and quiet between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Next door, there were people who wanted this place to become a 52nd state of the US or a Scandinavian social democracy. The founders of my own kibbutz, Huldah, semi-religious social anarchists, maintained that it was time for the Jewish people to come back to Israel, to create a loose federation of rural communities where the Jews would undergo a deep religious renewal, not in synagogue, but by being in constant touch with the elements of nature, by hard physical work and sharing everything with each other. There was, in short, a rainbow of fantasies. Zionism was an uneasy coalition of diverse dreams, and by definition, it would have been impossible for all those dreams to have been fulfilled. Today, some are partially fulfilled, some forgotten, and some have turned into nightmares. Israel is a fiery collection of arguments, and I like it this way, although it is no garden of roses. There is something very creative about this situation. Israel is a living open street seminar about Jewish heritage, about the meaning of Judaism, about morality, about the significance or marginality of holy places, about a hierarchy of different Jewish values. A whole nation has been immersed for the past 30 years in a debate which is superficially political or military, but which is essentially ethical, historical, even theological about the kind of identity they want. That's where I'm going to end the excerpt. I want to end just by lifting up something regarding the choice of a last name, moving from Klausner to Oz. So Oz is translated, it's a biblical word that can be translated as courage or strength. And the first mention of it in the Hebrew Bible is actually the book of Exodus that Rabbi Reese was talking about before. And the very first time the word Oz appears in the book of Exodus is in Exodus 15, in Shirat Hayam, in the Song of the Sea. And what makes that Song of the Sea so significant is it's a song about redemption. It's a song that the Israelites were singing as they walked through mud and water to get to the other side, to escape slavery and oppression, and perhaps learn what it is to be a free people. And I find it so meaningful now that I know that, one, because I didn't know this before today, that it was in Exodus was the first iteration of Oz. And I know Amos was not a religious man, but perhaps in his words, perhaps in his example and the legacy that he has created, we will soon find a taste of redemption in our own time.
Good afternoon. I am Jeremy Ben-Ami, and thank you very much to Rabbi Roos. Thank you to Rabbi Letterman. Thank you to the Temple Sinai community, which is my community, for opening up your space and your arms and your heart to this important gathering. I am so honored to be here with Fania representing your family, with so many others, leaders and members of Jewish institutions in our communities, synagogues, and other organizations who have come together to honor the memory of your father and to celebrate his legacy. I've only spoken twice at events like this, once for my father and once for my mother. Amos Oz was, to me, the ideological father, or perhaps brother, that I never had. We shared much in terms of the journeys that we went through in our families and in our thinking. Amos's father was born on June 12, 1910, mine on June 11, 1913. Our fathers and their families shared a political worldview. They were both active in the pre-state Irgun in pre-state Israel, and they shared a belief in strength and power as the key to the survival of the Jewish people and the creation of the state of Israel. By the way, there's another man on the world stage today who had a father of the same age who moved in the same political circles, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I believe that all three of our fathers knew each other at that time. While the Prime Minister remains a believer to this day that the Jewish people are destined to live by the sword, never compromising or giving an inch to their adversaries, I'm proud of my shared rebellion with Amos Oz against the worldview of our fathers. Born into a revisionist, right-of-center household, he charted his own course, turning to the political left and finding a home in the kibbutz movement, in the Labor Party, and ultimately in Meretz. Amos was the quintessential liberal Zionist. He stood up to those to his right who rejected liberalism and whose power today is rising here and in Israel. And he stood up to those to his left who reject Zionism and whose power today is growing as well. Amos believed clearly in the justice of the cause of the Jewish people's right to a state in the land of Israel. And he was equally clear in his belief in justice and the necessity of opposing zealotry on the extremes of all cultures and all religions. The best way that I know to honor the legacy and the memory of a man who inspired me so deeply is not simply to celebrate the clarity of the values for which he stood, but to commit to fight for them now that he is no longer here and in the fight himself. So my first commitment to Amos is to proudly hold and defend the flag of liberal Zionism against those to the right and those to the left, and to continue to balance the core values of Zionism with the humanistic values of liberalism. A second commitment that I make is to continue to battle, as Amos did, the notion that the problems that Israel and the Jewish people face can be addressed, as Israel's leadership today suggests, by the sword. As Fania knows well, her father was no pacifist. He may have been a founder of peace now and a supporter of peace as the goal to which we aspire. And this week, I would note, by the way, is the 40-year anniversary of the Camp David Accords of peace between Egypt and Israel. And it was around that which Amos and others founded the Israeli peace movement, Shalom Achshav. But having served in both the 1967 and 1973 wars, he understood there are times when it is necessary to fight. He understood that without the ability to defend itself, Israel wouldn't survive a day. That said, he was deeply concerned with Israel's fixation since 1967 on military force. He quoted the proverb frequently that to a man with a big hammer, every problem looks like a nail. He knew that force has its limits and should only be used as a last resort. Hamas, for instance, he wrote, is an idea, and no idea has ever been defeated by force. To defeat an idea, you have to offer a better idea. He was very clear that force ultimately is no solution for the problem that the Jewish people are not alone in the land of Israel. Amos understood that as early as 1967 that occupation, even unavoidable occupation, is corrupting. And to the end of his life, he remained a passionate advocate against occupation and for an agreement with the Palestinians to partition the land into 2 states. Even in his final month, when we at J Street were not aware of how serious the battle was that he was personally waging, he still worked with us to craft our end-of-year message to our supporters in his name. His views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were an inspiration to me and to all those in Israel and around the world who recognize that the Jewish people will only have a safe, secure, and democratic state of their own if and when the Palestinian people have one too. Amos gave me and those who share my worldview so much of the language and the imagery that we use today to make our case. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a tragedy, he would say. It's a clash of right and right. And tragedies, he would remind us, are resolved in only one of 2 ways: the Shakespearean way or the Chekhovian way. In a tragedy by Shakespeare, at the end, the stage is littered with dead bodies. In a tragedy by Chekhov, however, everyone is unhappy, they're disillusioned, they're bitter, they're melancholy, but they're alive. He and the peace movement, he would say, are working for a Chekhovian, not a Shakespearean, conclusion. He spoke of the need to look at peace with the Palestinians not through rose-colored glasses. He's the first person that I heard discuss the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, to discuss the issue not as a marriage but as a divorce, in which the couple is consigned to live together for eternity in the same house and has to figure out the arrangements of how to live together without killing each other. So my second commitment to you and to your father, Fania, is to carry forward the fight for the 2-state solution and the 2-state vision as the only way to resolve this conflict, not out of starry-eyed idealism, but out of stone-cold realism as to how we shape a better future, not only for our children and grandchildren, but those of our neighbors as well. Finally, I want to say a word about the way in which we carry on the struggle. How will we keep the intellectual and moral guiding light burning that Amos provided? We live in what I profoundly hope is a passing moment in human history, in which thoughtful and intellectual argument are being devalued by our leaders and sacrificed for the rapid-fire sparring of the political arena. Both in Israel and in the United States, our leaders have chosen to sink to the lowest common denominator, to grasp and to hold power. They play to base emotions of fear and hatred and intolerance, rather than seeking to lift up their peoples and their countries to idealistic heights. So a final thought for us today as we ponder how best to carry on the legacy of our friend and the memory of our mentor is to recommit to carrying on a spirited fight for what we believe in with elegance and with grace, to seek to win based on the substance of our beliefs, the morals that underpin them, and the power of the words that we choose. Words can be weaponized to harm and to hurt, or they can be mustered in thoughtful and powerful arguments to inspire, persuade, and motivate. Perhaps the greatest way to honor the legacy of your father will be not so much in choosing to stand on his side, of the weighty arguments of the day about Israel and Palestinians, but in the manner in which we choose to make our case and seek to prevail. It is now my honor and my privilege to share a video address sent to us by Natalie Portman, the award-winning actress who shared a special connection with Amos. Natalie was so inspired by Amos's book, A Tale of Love and Darkness, that she went on to write and direct her first movie based on it. Ladies and gentlemen, Natalie Portman.
Thank you, Jeremy. Knowing and working with Amos was one of the great experiences of my life. Amos was so fond of words, of language, and understood the particular Jewish power of storytelling and how important what stories we tell and how that shapes our reality. He loved love. He always talked about how much he loved his family and how much he loved art and stories and words. And he was able to use it in a political way as well. He understood that his position held great influence, and he was able to always keep us looking forward with hope to peace, always looking forward to living with our neighbors, not in a Pollyanna, unrealistically idealistic way, but in a way of what is the true Jewish nature of being a good human being and of living with your neighbors. And I'm so grateful to him for his words, just as an audience member, as his work as an artist, but also for his humanity, both the way he showed it to me personally and to my family, and the generosity he showed me in using his work to create my own, and also in the way he was publicly and the humanity he showed every day in advocating for peace till the last day of his life. So I miss him terribly. I send my love so much to his family and all the people who loved him, and I wish I could be there with you today to celebrate him.
هات الفضة. خد. خد خبر. خبر احنا على الرأس ايوه. ابعت ودي. روح جيب الفضة.
وينك حبيبي؟ يلا تعال نروح على البيت.
صباح الخير مس. أنا اسمي عموس. وأنتي؟
קוראים לי עיישה. זה אח שלי, עווד.
אבא שלך, אביך הנכבד, הציע לי לצאת החוצה לשחק איתכם.
הוא לא אבא שלי, הוא דוד של אמא שלי. אני לא גרה פה, אני גרה בתלביה.
איך את יודעת עברית?
אני לומדת פסנתר ברחביה כבר 3 שנים. זאת שפה יפה, וגם רחביה ממש יפה. מסודרת כזאת שקטה.
גם תלביה מסודרת ושקטה. אכפת לך שנדבר קצת?
אנחנו לא מדברים כבר?
יש מספיק מקום בארץ ישראל לשני העמים. צריך פשוט ללמוד לחיות יחדיו בשלום, בכבוד הדדי.
יש לי גם אח גדול בלונדון. הוא לומד להיות עורך דין.
מה את רוצה ללמוד כשתגדלי?
מה איתך? גם אתה תהיה עורך דין, על פי צורת הדיבור שלך.
למה בדיוק את חושבת ככה?
אני הולכת לכתוב ספר.
באמת? איזה ספר?
שירים.
שירים?
כן, בצרפתית ובאנגלית. אני גם כותבת בערבית, אבל אני לא מראה את זה לאף אחד. יש שירה עברית יפה?
בטח. לוין קיפניס, רחל, זאב ז'בוטינסקי, צ'רניחובסקי. דור אל בארץ. שיכור שפע החיים. נוכרי לגוי חולה ולשבט סובלים.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roger Cohen. I'm a columnist for the New York Times. More important, I was lucky enough to be a friend of Amos Oz. I would find Amos Oz in his Ramat Aviv apartment after his writing was done. That might be around 9 a.m. He was tousled, tender, strong, and soft-spoken. He had an old-world gentility, an Israeli directness, an American work ethic, and a universal humanity. The most fecund hours unfolded in the very early morning. It was then that he created. It's like reconstructing the whole of Paris from Lego bricks, he told me once of writing a novel. It's about 750,000 small decisions. It's not about who will live and who will die and who will go to bed with whom. Those are the easy ones. It's about choosing adjectives and adverbs and punctuation. These are molecular decisions that you have to take and nobody will appreciate. For the same reason that nobody ever pays attention to a single note in a symphony in a concert hall, except when the note is false. Anybody who has read My Michael or A Tale of Love and Darkness or any other of Oz's masterpieces knows how successful he was in this endeavor. Listen to him. Deception always gives itself away. It's like a blanket which is too short. When you try to cover your feet, your head is uncovered. And when you cover your head, your feet stick out. The writer reveals. From hurt and loss, he draws illumination. Love and darkness are not antinomies, but twins. His business is truth, and truth, more often than not, is brutal. Still, I am sure Amos would never have claimed that there was not a single false note in his work. He knew how intrinsic to humanity failure is, and what a stranger to humanity perfect outcomes are. He was suspicious of the idea of perfectibility, a cousin of absolutism. His soul was generous. His credo as a novelist was that humankind is open-ended. People are capable of surprising not only others, but themselves. He called this the single most promising phenomenon in history. This belief, I think, was the root of his stubborn optimism. He was a Zionist to his core. He believed that Jews need a place where the bus drivers and the plumbers and the farmers and the soldiers are also Jewish, a homeland, in other words. He was proud of his country, belonged to it, excavated it, fought for it, rendered it, and loved it, as one loves an unruly child. To me, he was nothing less than Israel's conscience. Be true as a Jew to what you are, not what newfound power enables you to be. He believed with equal certitude that Palestinians need a state. This was a condition for peace. Millions of human beings present on the same land could not be chased away or conjured away or wished away. To think otherwise was a dangerous temptation, an illusion whose fruit would be bitter. The occupation was corrupting, as Jeremy already said. The settlement enterprise, a grave error, compromising and blinding. When Oz expressed this view, it reflected more than a strategic conviction. It reflected a human and ethical obligation. It was inseparable from his conception of Jewishness. How could a people who had been homeless for so long forever inflict homelessness on others? That which is hateful to yourself, do not do to your fellow man. In our conversations, he would return to this theme. He was unbowed and unrequited. There cannot be one state, he would suggest, because Israelis and Palestinians cannot become one happy family. They are not one, and they are not happy. So the only solution is turning the house into 2 smaller apartments. To me, this truth is self-evident, yet Oz's voice grew more isolated. Today, just down the road from here and over in Jerusalem, a new breed, or perhaps not so new breed, of man bestrides the earth, canny in manipulation, convinced that phrases like the rule of law or human rights are just code for a leftist agenda that will sap the strength of the great, ever greater sovereign nation. They mock an independent judiciary. They are shocked when the people come after them, for they see themselves as invincible. They value image over substance, charm over character, dominion over dignity, and slickness over decency. They use ethno-nationalism to consolidate power. They regard compromise as weakness, whereas Oz saw the readiness for compromise as bravery. Yes, the courage to make hard choices. Lincoln, Gandhi, Churchill, Begin, Sadat, Rabin, and Gorbachev were all called traitors, of course. That's worth recalling in this week that marks the little observed 40th anniversary of the impossible Israeli-Egyptian peace. By contrast, in Israeli history books, I believe the chapter on the past decade will be called the kick the can years. The forging of a 2-state outcome remains the great task before Israel and the Palestinians, impossible or unfashionable as it may seem today. Yes, it is hard, and yes, Palestinian division, victimhood, violence, and bad leadership make it harder. Some say it can no longer be achieved, it's gone forever. But then I hear Amos's words echoing in my head. I live in the desert at Arad. Every morning at 5 a.m. I start my day by taking a walk before sunrise. I inhale the silence. I take in the breeze, the silhouettes of the hills. I walk for about 40 minutes. When I come back home, I turn on the radio, and sometimes I hear politicians using words like never, or forever, or for eternity, and I know that the stones out in the desert are laughing at him. Perhaps you know the story of the old man on his deathbed, approached by his children. Dad, they say, we were afraid to ask you this before, but perhaps the time has come. Do you want to be buried or cremated? A long silence follows. Oh, I don't know, the old man says. Surprise me. Amos's truths will still surprise us, perhaps as soon as April 9. In the winter, we cannot imagine the cherry blossom, the magnolia, yet they come, and here they are. Rabbi Roos mentioned irreverence. Amos loved humor. I remember on one of my last visits, he had just been awarded a major literary prize by the Chinese. And he told me that he went to China to collect the prize, and he was ushered into a vast hall full of suited and solemn Chinese gentlemen, mainly gentlemen. And he went up on the stage, and he said, I'm most honored to have received this prize, and I am particularly honored because between us, the Chinese and the Jews represent more than 20% of humanity. In conclusion, in My Michael, Oz wrote, instead of being a light to the nations, we have become just one of the nations. And who can say whether it is for better or worse? This delicate question bears long, dare I say, Talmudic contemplation. The Zionist ideal contained in Israel's founding charter of 1948 could not meet the reality of a tough, even brutal neighborhood and emerge unscathed. Dreams are always preludes to disappointment. Besides, Oz seemed to intimate with that question, the beautiful idea of tikkun olam does carry a hint of messianic temptation. It is perhaps not such a bad thing that Jews should simply have a country, a home, a place of belonging, like other nations. Yet this outcome is insufficient. Israel cannot be satisfied with existence alone. Millennial Jewish survival can only be understood through the force of ideas and ideals. As Hillel put it, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, who am I? If not now, when? If not now, when? Amos once said to me, I would say that the patient, Israeli and Palestinian, is unhappily ready for surgery, while the doctors are cowards. In A Tale of Love and Darkness, Oz described walking out into the desert at dawn. Now, he wrote, you can hear the full depths of the desert silence. It isn't the quiet before the storm or the silence of the end of the world, but a silence that covers another, even deeper silence. This is how I imagine Amos now, inhaling the biblical silence of his scarred, imperfect, beautiful, beloved Israel, of still uncertain borders, a silence that is also an admonition to the ambient shrieking of those cowards. Thank you.
I'm Rabbi Stephanie Crawley. I'm the assistant rabbi at Temple Micah. Amos Oz lived a life that was an ode to words. The written word of all types and language, editorial and fiction, autobiographical and imagined. In Jews and Words, the book he co-authored with his daughter, they expound on what they call a text line, suggesting that more than blood, more than theology, our lineage is text, our inheritance is word. But it is not only that we have these texts, that we teach them and pass them down, editing and commenting and rewriting, but about the role of words. They wrote, Jews display a deeply rooted belief in the power of words to create and recreate reality. Oz believed that words and books change us. He believed that books might just save us from ourselves. In 2005, upon receiving the Goethe Prize, he reflected, I believe that imagining the other is a powerful antidote to fanaticism and hatred. I believe that books that make us imagine the other may turn us more immune to the ploys of the devil, including the inner devil. Imagining the other is not only an aesthetic tool, it is, in my view, also a major moral imperative. And finally, imagining the other, if you promise not to quote this very little professional secret, imagining the other is also a deep and very subtle human pleasure. He had a deep, deep empathy which drew me, which drew all of us to his writing. Whether it was the way he related to the diverse people he conversed with in the land of Israel, or the nuanced and profound way he welcomed us into the imagined minds of kibbutznikim, a Tel Aviv family of Arabs and Jews. We needed and we need his words. In a short essay titled Events and Books, originally published in 1966, Oz sets out this as an agenda of his writing, and it is the passage I would like to share today. He writes, words are connected to a place from which our capricious witness contemplates events. The secret for an agent is a traitor, that in his heart of hearts he is not looking for a formula that will remove suffering, but the right words to describe it. Is my aim to proclaim over the whole world of literature that I tell of myself, that is all I can tell of, my world is as small as the world of an ant? No, not always, not in every sense. True, while the caravan is passing, these men of words merely bark or howl. But sometimes the caravan loses its way or its strength and comes to a weary halt. Then the blind man may be able to lead the sighted. The wordsmith's anguish, his mockery, his darkness suddenly become a landmark. Reality itself, the realm of decision and achievement, has its moments when it tries to get back to its original source, to the darkness of desires and fears and dreams from which it comes. At such times, the blind man, the sniper of stragglers, the man of words, can take events by the arm and say, here, this way, or look out, a chasm, or stop, rest. And thus he can lead the way through agony, loneliness, and darkness, which he knows backwards with his mental map of pathways. May we only need these books to broaden our minds. May all our actions succeed. Even so, it is good to have them there, in the corner, on the shelf, against a rainy day. I stand here grateful for his books, which fill a whole row on our shelves, ready to be pulled off when we need a reminder of the importance of imagination, of empathy. He leaves us a legacy of words which are waiting, prepared to help lead us through the darkness, ready to help us find our way back to ourselves.
Shalom, dear friends. My name is Fania Oz-Salzberger. I'm deeply touched to be here. I will begin by thanking, although there is no way I can thank you all. Thanks, dear Jeremy Ben-Ami, for thinking this wonderful event up, and to your wonderful team. Thank you, dear rabbis Ruth, Lederman, and Crowley. Thank you, dear Roger, for your wonderful words. Special thanks and admiration to Chief Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has just joined us here. And thank you all. This place is full of the people he loved most, his readers. You are the ones who are helping me make sense of my terrible grief. It's only been 3 months, and the pain is immeasurable. You know, perhaps there is this extra little bit of pain for a secular person like my father was, and I am, because for us, life is life, but there is no afterlife, and I will not see and hear him again. And yet, here he is. Because you see, we Jewish seculars are not exactly atheists or agnostics or irreligious or non-believers or all these things that begin with a negative prefix. We are not negative prefixes. We are chilonim. We celebrate life and we celebrate the miracles of life, and believe me that life is full of miracles. So thought my father. So he kept telling me. He thought, for example, that one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest miracle on earth, and perhaps the greatest mystery on earth, is the family. Has been mentioned before by some of the speakers. And I add, not just the old-fashioned family, but any sort of family that carries the basics of family. Love, gentleness, warmth, physical and intellectual nutrition, Jewish parroting, writ, large. You see, my father's personal life began with the terrible tragedy of losing Fania, my grandmother. I still can't believe that Natalie Portman actually played my granny. You know, this is a strange thought. Let me also say that my father ended his life in relative peace with very little pain in his sleep, so surrounded by the loved ones of his family, children, grandchildren, his wonderful wife, my mother. But let me zoom out from the personal to the public, to the historical. I'm a history professor by profession, by telling you that my father's life began in 1939 with one of the worst tragedy that ever befell the Jewish people and perhaps humankind as a whole. And my father's life ended in a very dramatic moment in Israeli and Jewish history, perhaps also world history, and we still do not know whether this will be another tragedy that will befall us, or perhaps some miracle, human miracle, will open up. I am here to speak not only about my personal father, not only about his literature, but also adamantly about his politics, his deep politics. Because as you may know, my father kept his literature, his novelist's soul, and his political soul well apart. He used to speak of the two pens on his desk, black and the blue, I can't remember which is which, one for the novels and the stories, and one to tell his prime minister, whoever that would be, to go to hell. However, there is a deep political aspect, in the deepest, most philosophical, most moral sense of politics, pertaining to each and every one of his books. He used to tell us, all my novels are democracies. And I believe they are, by the way, full of characters, elbowing one another to the top of the line, like one of those Tel Aviv bus queues, and asking the writer, not asking, demanding of the novelist, screaming at the tops of their voices, to speak for them and their clashing opinions, worldviews, interests, and passions. So that my father used his 100-string instrument in order to play out all those clashing souls running around his books. That is a democracy. Could have been an anarchy if he hadn't managed to actually write them so well. It goes deeper than that. True literature is about listening and then voicing what you have heard with, as Jeremy so well put it, without false notes. Listening and storytelling, the best kind of listening and the best kind of storytelling, was for my father also a political secret. Whenever he met one of his numerous Palestinian friends and interlocutors, he would say, I want to listen to your story, and perhaps you would like to listen to mine. This is not only literary. It is deeply political, where politics meets morality and the humane. Now, I've not flown all the way to DC in order to tell you things that you already know, and I would like to share with you, briefly, 3 relatively novel ideas that my father has been playing out with in the last year, perhaps the last months of his life. I am here to share them with you. You may have heard something, but all these were relatively new because he kept coming up with new ideas. He was quite a young man in this respect. First, I'd like to speak of his 11th commandment. Some of you have heard this before. Or indeed, for him, the first commandment, perhaps even the only single commandment that we need. He recently said, told several audiences, told us at home, that he feels as though he could put together the 10 commandments of the Torah and perhaps all the rest of those moral imperatives by the other philosophers, Jewish and non-Jewish, that he respected, pushing them together into just one commandment. Thou shalt not inflict pain. Typically in Hebrew it's only 2 words. I mean, English is a long language. Lo tach'iv. Do not hurt as far as you can. And if you have to inflict pain, do it as minimally as possible. This is true for love, this is true for family, this is true for parenting, this is true for politics, this is true for every aspect of our lives. Thou shalt not inflict pain if you can possibly help it. By the way, also not unto yourself. That's one little kernel of his wisdom I wanted to share here. Another recent idea, so very recent that maybe quite a few of you have not heard it before, was brought out for the first time in public in that famous last lecture in Tel Aviv University that we have on YouTube, and J Street has very kindly offered and added the English subtitles. It is titled, All the Reckoning is Not Over, or perhaps the reckoning is not over yet. This is a phrase ending a wonderful novella by Yosef Chaim Brenner, the early Zionist Hebrew writer, a bitter man, a heartbroken man, and also a man full of hope. The reckoning is not over yet. We have just made this little lecture into a tiny book that appeared in Hebrew in Israel last week, hopefully also in translations to follow. Kol hacheshbon od lo nigmar. And some beautiful new ideas appear in this lecture, in this little book. Some of them you have heard here echoing before, such as the idea that history is open-ended, that woman and man are full of surprises, that we Jews are even more full of surprises, and that nothing is determined as far as the future goes. But the other little idea I wanted to share with you from that lecture now book is a term, a medical term my father invented for this lecture, in Hebrew, shachzeret, from the word shichzur, lachzor, chazara. In English, sounds very medical, reconstritis. The idea of the romantic, dangerous, damaging idea of reconstructing our past exactly as it was. Nothing can be more dangerous than that to an individual or to a nation, Amos said. And he went on to tell about a meeting with a Palestinian intellectual in Paris who said to him, I hail from the village of Lifta, that is not me, but my grandfather, Lifta near Jerusalem, the beautiful Lifta with a spring of fresh water and the boats and the goats with the bells down the hill and the vineyards. All I want is to be able to come back to Lifta, to re-inhabit my grandfather's little house, not forever, just in the vacances coming from Paris and listen to the bells on the necks of the goats. And my father said to this young man, Dear sir, I totally and deeply understand you, but you have caught dangerous case of reconstritis. Because you see, if all Palestinians come home to Lifta, It will not be the village of 300 people that your grandfather knew. It would be a big town, a suburb of Jerusalem with supermarkets, shopping malls, and huge traffic jams. Take it from me. Same thing goes for the settlers in Judea and Samaria wishing to bring back the biblical landscapes of our patriarchs. This will never be. Because even if we, chas v'chalila, God forbid, pushed out the Palestinians from the Temple Mount and reconstructed the third temple of the Jews, can you imagine what the holidays would look like? Can you imagine the sheer traffic jam? Can you imagine the failure of the air conditioning? He goes on like that for a while. Reconstructitis is a dangerous disease. You cannot, and here I'm quoting a beautiful sentence from the lecture and the book, you cannot find in space what you have lost in time. What about Zionism? Isn't that one big case of reconstructitis? Well, says my father, I thought about it for a little bit, but you know, we're in the danger of becoming a case of reconstructitis to our own damage. But it wasn't to begin with. Of course, there was the flavor of the biblical past and the longing and the nostalgia and the Jewish continuity. Lashana haba'a b'Yerushalayim. There was all that. But this was only the flavoring, not the gist of the Zionist project. The gist of the Zionist project was saving Jewish lives in real time in the 20th century. The rest was a wonderful cultural additive. But the truth of the matter is that if it had not been for Zionism, neither my father or my grandparents or me would have been able to live. Nor the Jews of Baghdad and Morocco who had to flee as soon as the British left Baghdad and the French left North Africa. Zionism was a lifesaver, deeply flavored with a cultural sense of belonging, but first and foremost, a lifesaver. And strangely enough, this universal human notion of a nation state for the stateless, the persecuted, and the refugee, this non-specifically Zionist need to save the lives of 1 million Jews from Europe in the last moment, and of 1 million Jews from the Middle East in the last moment. This non-Zionist, non-specifically Zionist need that was served is the best possible justification of Zionism that we have. And we should hope and pray, which I do in my secular way, that reconstructitis in the form of nationalist nostalgia will not take over the Israeli project. Because despite our deepest biblical roots, which are not biological or physiological or genetic, but deeply, beautifully textual, despite these roots, it is not the whole house we need. It is a partition of the house. A lifesaver for one nation and a lifesaver for the next door nation. Reconstructist versus realism. The first and last little takeaway I want to bring you is not from the book that my father and I wrote together, Jews and Words, which, by the way, made him very happy, but the book that we were just beginning to write together. And that is a secret. You are the first ones to hear. He wanted us, it was his idea, to write a new little book about truth, about literary truth, about historical truth. We used to think they were miles apart, now we no longer think so. Perhaps even about legal truth. What makes the Bible true if you are not a believer? The depth of its literary wisdom. The authentic voices of its female and male protagonists, whether or not they existed. This is literary truth. This can become historical truth. Because the truth of Abraham and Sarah, whether or not they actually lived on this earth, the moment in which Sarah laughs in the face of God, for us a very crucial moment, both the laughter and in the face of God, and most of all Sarah. That truth is similar to the truth of the existence of Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov. Invented figure, perhaps, but as true as they get. This is the book we wanted to write. And when we were going over his papers after his death, I found several pages in his handwriting with the basic points that he already laid out for our joint book. Shall I tell you what's there? I can't, because my eyes were clouded with tears. I did not read them yet. But in the age of false facts and fake news and alternative histories and what have you, Amos wanted his next book to be about truth in the deepest sense. By the way, not facts. He used to say facts are sometimes the enemies of truth. In the deepest sense, where literature meets the political, the moral, and indeed the human. And that is why he wrote, as Jeremy said, like a musician, trying not to utter a single false note, because literature, too, is about truth. And when you read it, you, his beloved readers, you know it, you feel it. I have to end with Jewish humor. Roger has taken up much of what I wanted to say about Amos's love of Jewish humor. He thought that Jewish humor was the best humor in the world, with the possible exception of his father, whose jokes were awful. But what makes Jewish humor so good, by the way, this totally crosses the Ashkenazi-Sephardi line. Don't think only Yiddish, think Ladino. We've been through a few wonderful Ladino texts of humor. What comes at the deep end of Jewish humor is not only the irreverence. It is the fact that irony or sarcasm in their Jewish way are never directed at the powerless. They are always directed at the powerful. We laugh, as Sarah did, even in the face of God, not to mention the rabbi and my father and even grandmother. We laugh in the face of the powerful. What about the famous Jewish self-derision? The way Jews always survive by laughing a little bit at themselves. Well, we have been laughing at ourselves because deep inside we knew how powerful that made us. And even deeper than that, the love of an intellectual surprise. And a good joke, especially a good Jewish joke, is always an intellectual surprise. Closing the circle, going back to the beginning of what I said and some of the others, we live in an open-ended world, in open-ended history. Women and men are prone to surprise themselves and each other, and that is probably the best hope that we have. And I'm going to end with a joke. You will have to forgive me, because I know that Amos is not only forgiving me, but says, Fania, aren't you going to end with a joke? Yes, I will. But it's not a joke, it's a true story about me and the big rabbi on the El Al airplane. May I? Me and the big rabbi on the El Al airplane. So here I am sitting on my El Al seat back to Israel from London, minding my own business, and in comes a big rabbi. Now, he was physically big, but it turned out he was also very big in his yeshiva in Bnei Brak. And the big rabbi has to sit next to me, and he does not want to sit next to me. Has anybody been through this before? Yeah, the rumor has reached you, and there is some squabbling in the little passage of the El Al plane. Eventually, the poor guy has to sit next to me. We take off. I raise my glass, my plastic cup of wonderful El Al fresh water, and I say, "Dear Rabbi, I know you did not want to sit next to me, but I wish you a pleasant flight anyway." To which the rabbi answers, "Oh, no, please don't take it personally. It is not personal at all. I assure you that my own wife would not have liked to sit next to your husband either." Thank you very much. We talk Tanakh, Talmud. As usual, we find out the interesting truth that a kibbutz-reared child knows more Tanakh, not Torah, but Tanakh, than the big rabbis from Bnei Brak, but his Talmud was better than mine. Okay, sweet. I think it was the most enjoyable 4-hour flight in his life, if I may say so. We parted as friends, but I did mention to him that I happened to have authored with my father this little book called Jews and Words. Could I send it to him? He says, yes, why not send it? I sent him the book, co-signed, autographed by Amos and myself, and we thought we would never hear anything. Do I still have 2 minutes to finish the story? Because 2 weeks later, I get an email from Bnei Brak. Now, I want you to realize that getting an email from a Bnei Brak yeshiva is like getting a fax from Aristotle. Okay. It was not from the rabbi. It was from the rabbi's secretary. And believe me, the rabbi's secretary is not what you think. It is a wonderful avrech, a good yeshiva man who wrote the email for the rabbi. Dear Ms. Oz, Mrs. Oz, Gveret Oz, the rabbi would like to thank you for sending your book, but he shall not read your book because he knows that your book is against the very gist of his Jewish creed, and therefore he will not read it, but he thanks you anyway. Yours sincerely, M. Natanzon's secretary. So I print out the email, I rush to my father's home in Ramat Aviv, the same one that you visited. I said, Abba, here is an email from the rabbi. He's not going to read our book. So my father looks at the email, he looks at me, and he says, Fania, let me promise you something. Not only is the rabbi going to read our book, but what is much more important, his wife is going to read our book. People are unexpected. We can all surprise ourselves. History is open-ended, including both Israeli and US history. Let us continue speaking truth to power. Thank you very much.
Actually, if you would, just please remain standing. We'll conclude with this traditional blessing, perhaps this the greatest ending joke of all, given his perspective on the tradition. But I suppose if he could hear us, I would say, with such importance and such value given to words and to their passing, Eleh Devarim. So these are the words. This is what our tradition would offer in his memory, these words of El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezo HaRakia Mazirim, Et Nishmat Amos ben Fania, V'Yehuda Aryeh, Shehalach Le'olamo, Baal HaRachamim Yasterehu B'Seter Kenafav Le'olamim, Vayitzur B'Yitzur HaChaim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. May the source of life, the fountain of all being, open our hearts to compassion and our eyes to wisdom, that we might glimpse in perfect peace and sadness the way of all things. May the memory of Amos Oz be for us a blessing, and may we never let the light of his love grow dim in our hearts. May we remember all his worthy and righteous deeds, that his memory be forever bound up in the bond of life. God is our source and our destination, our beginning and our end. May Amos's death awaken us to this truth, that the bond of love we shared and share not be severed in sorrow. May he rest in peace as we together say, Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in his honor and his memory today.